Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Two Jews and a Scotch. In today's episode of the Academy's podcast, the two Jews are myself, Ilana Stein, and I'm here with Sarah Sassoon, who is sitting in Jerusalem. I'm going to introduce her in a moment. And while I've definitely got my Scotch here, we're doing a little Jameson Select Reserve in case anyone's interested. Sarah's got her Scotch in some green tea, so we'll leave it at that. That's okay. And so let us begin. And there's a couple of things that Sarah and I have been chatting about that we just thought we'd like to share. Where we find ourselves at the moment, of course, is in the period between Yom HaShoah, which took place yesterday, and where we're going to go next week, which is Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. And it feels historical on the micro level, call it that. In other words, from the point of view of in these two dates in a year. And yet at the same time, of course, the movement from the Holocaust into the declaration of the State of Israel is also obviously a very closely connected and chronological one. And so this understanding and this idea of what it means to live in history is something that Sarah and I are going to talk about, but with particular reference to, of course, the Tanakh. We've been going in terms of the Academy is that last year in South Africa and this year in Israel, in fact, we have redone and have been reteaching our course, which is really Tanakh in a year. We've renamed it into the Journey. And Sarah is one of our faculty members. And so this really is no coincidence that we're able to talk about Tanakh, talk about today, talk about where she is and where we are in history as well as in geography. And that's what we're going to put together. So before we start, I just want to introduce Sarah officially. And Sarah is Australian born. She's an Iraqi Jewish writer. Particularly love her book, which has won a couple of awards. That's Shoham's Bangle, which is her first book. And then the other book, which was this, what was it called? Sorry, Sarah. This is not a Cholent. This is not a Cholent. Yeah. Absolutely beautiful kids' books, which use a lot of her history, her own personal history, and bring a very different view to, I think, to Jewish children's literature. So that is one of the main things. She's written, of course, for a number of other places. She's, in fact, an official poet. And she is also an Elson Israel Fellow with the Jewish Federation of Tulsa. That's what she's currently doing. And she is constantly exploring and unpacking her Iraqi Jewish history. And that is where, for example, she has come to be part of the Academy in a number of ways. Taught for us many years ago when she and her family lived, before they made Aliyah, when they lived in South Africa. And the book that she chose to teach in our Tanakh course was the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. And she's going to explain to us why this has such personal relevance and resonates so with her and with her family. But that was the book and is the book that Sarah, in fact, is currently teaching for us, as well as developing a course. It was a 6-parter, Sarah, if I'm not mistaken. There were 2 courses that really went into more depth in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, as well as a course where we connected, and I'm sorry, but I actually can't remember the name of the course, but where we connected Babylon of old with Babylon today. And we actually spoke to people who had actually been through what you will tell us about, the movement of Iraqi Jewry from the return, the Aliyah, whatever, of Iraqi Jewry from Iraq.
Exactly. We did a parallel. We did an amazing parallel.
Thank you.
The history of the Jews, modern history of the Jews of Iraq to the Jews from Babylonia and their return of Ezra and Nehemiah, and how there is such a parallel in the modern Zionism and also the return with Ezra and Nehemiah, which is always fascinating to explore and unpack, especially for today.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Thanks for joining, putting that in. Just to tell us where you are. So Sarah is living in Jerusalem with her husband, her 4 boys, and a dog.
And a dog.
Whose
we
name
might hear
is?
him back. Ace.
Right. So that's always important for me. So there we go. That's where Sarah is. I find myself in Johannesburg, and we're going to begin, and we'll be unpacking some of these points that is Sarah's particular forte as we go along. So perhaps we can begin then, Sarah, with just catching us up a little bit on the last few weeks in which, of course, Israel has been at war with Iran. We are now in a somewhat sort of tentative ceasefire. At this particular moment. By the time we air this, who knows? But at the same time, we are still at war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so what I'd like to do is say that we are also, of course, davening for all our soldiers who stand between us and the enemy on all our borders, but particularly in Lebanon at the moment. And we should only have, of course, a peaceful and safe return of everybody to our homes. So with that, we will begin. So Sarah, do you want to maybe give us a little bit of some insights? What's been happening in your head? How have you felt about living through this?
So it's big, obviously. It's a very big move when Israel went to war with America on Iran, a preemptive strike, really, which are always the most effective in Israeli history, as we know. It wasn't unexpected because since the Iranian people went to the streets to protest, and we know that over 30,000 were killed brutally by the regime, Israelis knew what was coming next. We knew, and we felt, and I'm speaking for the person on the street, we felt a moral duty to take out the Iranian regime for these people who had gone to the streets, and no one protected them. No one could say to the regime, they didn't have soldiers like we do, stopping them from being bullied and terrorized by their own government. And so I'll never forget, there was an Instagram post of this pregnant Israeli woman addressing the Iranian people and said, I'm Israeli, I'm pregnant, I'm willing to go to my shelter for you. She was very heavily pregnant. So it was this feeling that we knew we'd have to take this big step. And obviously, I mean, it's little Israel. We are such a tiny country and such a tiny population against the mighty Iran, which is so big in size and population. And as Purim approached, it was like, okay, when's it happening? We thought it would happen like a month before. It did happen, to be honest. But when the siren happened on Shabbat morning, and for some reason everything's on Shabbat, we were surprised, as every siren seems to be a surprise, no matter what we know and expect. And to be told Israel's invaded Iran, they're taking them out, they're bombing with America. And it was a very grateful feeling that we were with America, obviously. Grateful that we weren't alone in this. And there's a lot of gratitude to the American servicemen, a lot of respect for all the Americans who's taking out an evil regime. Because as I wrote in that article recently that I published on Substack, we've been dealing with sirens, and life still grows like the tulips in my garden in Jerusalem. And we're willing to bear it because we know that if the Iranian regime isn't taken out, if they do have nuclear capability, we as Jews know how history plays out. We don't trust. Or let's put it this way, maybe we now understand and we can't afford to be naive. We trust what people say they want to do. When the Ayatollah says that America's the big Satan, Israel's the small Satan, and they want to take us out and destroy us, and they have the clock of destruction in Palestine Square, in the middle of Tehran, ticking, ticking, ticking for the destruction of Israel, we take that seriously because behind the words is real intent. And from my generation, who grew up with Holocaust survivors, who grew up knowing how words have an effect and how propaganda builds up to something that can't be stopped in the end, as evil is allowed to have a voice, to have an opinion even, to have a platform, it becomes quickly into something that can't be stopped because evil does not hesitate to use guns like they used on their own people. And on the Iranian people, evil makes people silent. People who'd like to speak out but can't because they know it's at the risk of their own lives, of their families' lives. And one of the things I'm really aware of is how many people in the Middle East, for example, can't speak out in their own countries against their governments, against, like in Iraq, I know people can't speak out against that they've become an Iranian proxy. Iran controls Iraq, and they don't want that. They don't want to be a radical Islamic country. They don't want their girls married off at 9, which is the legal age of marriage in Iraq. But they can't talk up about that. They can barely talk up against the Tigris River, which has been drying up, although they had a very good rainy season this season. So the Tigris River is in a healthier position. Yes, thank God. And there's a feeling of blessing. There are many people in the Middle East who are cheering Israel and America on. They want the freedoms that they see people have in America, in Australia, in Europe. And they're like, why can't we have that? We're intelligent. We're educated. We want a better life. We don't want to live under oppressive Islamic radicalism. We want to be able to say what we think. We want to be creative. We want freedom of business and networks within the Middle East. Why do we have to be on fire? And that's the question I have. Why does the world think the Middle East always has to be on fire? Why do we always have to be at war? And I think more and more people are questioning it. And the more people can get through the propaganda that is being perpetuated about Israel and Israel's intent, that then they see the truth and say, wait, Israel has 2 million Arabs living within their society. Arabs here are in the hospitals, in the pharmacies. Every sign has Arabic on it and English and Hebrew. There's a sense of partnership where the Arabs want partnership. And this is something that already exists in Israel. Can we take it to the rest of the Middle East, and can we normalize relations? And that's what scares these totalitarian states the most. What they forbid the most is normalization with Israel, because God forbid an Arab in Iraq meets an Israeli like me and says, wait, she's also Iraqi. She's a nice person. She has no intent of harm. And she just sees a better future for all of us together. Maybe we can do this. Maybe we can cooperate. And then Israel's accepted, and a Jewish state is accepted within the Middle East. And there's a whole new vista of what's possible here. And we actually start going pre-Islamic when we accept a Jewish state, because Israel, as we know, is an ancient biblical country. And suddenly everyone has to open their Bibles and say, who are the Jews? Which is why the academy and what we teach and the books of Ezra and Nehemiah specifically for me are so important. There's so much we can still unpack and learn. This is our ancient Jewish wisdom, which I feel is more relevant than ever. And when I read the books of Tanakh, and the more I learn, the more relevant it feels being in Israel and what we can offer the world as Israelis and Jews. And I'm at a stage where I couldn't be prouder to be Israeli and Jewish. I couldn't be prouder, even though there are so many who bash us, and even Jews who don't understand what we're doing in Israel and who we are. But when an Iranian person says to me, we love you, thank you for fighting the Iranian regime, even though they're the ones facing the bombs that we have to send against the regime, but they know that we're not trying to kill them. They know that the bombs and the attacks are very, very specific against the terrorists, against the regime's members, against people who are a threat to Israel and also a threat to them.
Right. Well, I think, wow, that's an amazing sum up. And, and then your dog barked at the correct moment.
Sorry.
Other people say, you sneeze on the truth is a Yiddish saying. I don't know the actual Yiddish, but sneeze on the truth. And I always think dogs bark on the truth. So there you go.
There you go.
It's doing it. But let's actually take that point, because I think it's so interesting. The whole aim of between Rav Ramon and myself and others, when we started looking at Tanakh from the point of view of not just the book of books and our book and our history, but rather to say, how did the Tanakh change paradigms, shift paradigms, change mindsets in the world? And what we've looked at throughout the course, and just to take us now into this next moment then, is that we said that the Tanakh looks at the world obviously from the point of view of ethical monotheism, and attempts to say to the world that not only is there one God who created the world out of love, but wants a relationship with human beings. So that's the first point. It's a humanist, or rather not humanist, but something for all humanity that begins with the Jewish people, but it's never meant to stop there. It is meant to flow outwards. And Rabbi Sacks always talks about the fact that Israel is specifically placed as a very small country, not an empire, but amongst empires, so that it can perhaps influence those around them. And I think it's something that Tanakh manages to do, shows us that the Jews managed to do at certain points. We didn't always succeed. But the idea, one of the other primary ideas, and I think it talks to your point about, for example, as you say, meeting another Iraqi, right? And seeing the humanity in the other. The basis of Bereshit, of Genesis, is that God creates all humanity in the image of God, in the image of God. And so that means when I see the other, I should not see them as a Satan, as a subhuman, as any of those kind of words, which sadly have risen again.
Sorry,
What I'm saying? Okay, starting again from this point. Rabbi Sacks always said that the placement of Israel, and we often speak about it both in our Tanakh course and in our Zionism courses, is that the placement of Israel not to be an empire, to be a small land, but amongst empires, amongst all the superpowers of the time, meant that it should be able to influence the others to see everyone in the image of God, but also to understand the idea of a morality, of a moral society, a moral ethical society. And that's what the Tanakh aimed to change. And just briefly, just to give us a little bit of a whirlwind tour, is that if we understand that we enter the land of Israel in the time of Joshua, we attempt to set up a society that is moral. We don't always get it right. And so what ends up happening is that we go into exile in 586 BCE to Babylon. And the books of the prophets end at that point to a certain extent. The book of Kings, for example, and some of our not the last prophets, they're a little later, but they end at this point where Israel as a nation is saying, is this the end? Is this the end of us? What has happened to our covenant with God? And it isn't the end. And we know this why, because in fact, and I'm just thinking of this in terms of Iran. And as you say, and I also am in contact with Iranians who are so excited about Israel bombing because they're saying that and seeing the good in Israel and seeing Israelis as friends, as people and they've always say Persians and Israelis or Jews were always friends. And indeed, that's how the whole Tanakh ends. The very last bit in Chronicles has Cyrus the Great, a Persian king, rises up and says to the Jews, Vayal should go back, should go on Aliyah back to Israel. And of course, that's where your books come in and your particular history. So I just wanted to give that sort of little historical background on how Tanakh fits in. And so it makes sense now that today it's the same. It's the same story, really, just with a few extra little elements coming in. But so then from that, let's talk about that. Is in terms of the Tanakh course, which you've been doing and which you're teaching as well. So before we get to your actual book, what is resonating with you from learning or relearning it to today?
Right. No. So, when you go into the prophets and the kings and the prophets and Joshua, and you realize, first of all, it's pretty wonderful studying Tanakh when you live in Israel, because like you drive through Judea and Samaria and like, okay, this is high up. This is the mountainous area where they came in from the desert. They couldn't go into the lowlands because the Philistines were there and they couldn't fight the Philistines. It was too hard. So they went high up where they were safe, just like the Druze live high up because it's safer. And this whole idea that we're always looking for safety and that we're that we're always struggling. Like the name Yisrael means to struggle with God. And that idea that we wrestle with God, we struggle with God, we always have done that. And there's never been complete unity. And that's one of the things, like the hardest thing for me living in Israel, having grown up in Sydney and South Africa, knowing what it is to be a diaspora Jew, where it's so precious to be a Jew. You understand that we're small in number, we have to stick together. So you go to your community shul, and it doesn't matter what age you are or what, like I was an Iraqi going to an Ashkenazi shul in Sydney, it didn't matter, because we all came together as Jews. And that's what mattered, that we were together as Jews and we were strong together. And then when you come to Israel and you realize, whoa, there's a lot of Jews here. And wait, why are they arguing? Or why are they protesting on the streets exactly? I don't understand. They're so angry. There's so much, sometimes it feels like there's so much division. And I personally can't understand it, because with my vision of what Israel is and Judaism is and what the Torah teaches people, that we have to be together and have a big vision to get. Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Hi, I don't actually know if this is my side or your side. That's the
I
problem.
don't know. I'm so sorry.
Okay, it's fine.
Luckily,
I've
this
marked
is
it.
live.
Yes, exactly. No, absolutely. So, and the truth is, it could be my side because I've got terrible signal. Yes, it's still carried on recording.
Amazing.
So,
okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, and I don't
I'm
remember
just going
what
to
they
add
say.
another marker here.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying about being a diaspora Jew. So I don't know if you want to go back to that point, but then also to just go from, let's move on. I was just looking at the time as well. And so let's move to where you want to go with this.
Okay.
So you don't have to spend time on answering my question, but rather I want to go into then your,
Sure.
So I'm going to mark now. Yeah, go for it.
So the thing is, when I see disunity in Israel, and we've had the protests and we have many different opinions, and I look at it from the perspective of Tanakh, and it's like when the temple's destroyed, and you see it's because of corruption and lack of social justice. And I read the words of Amos, and the reality is that we need everyone within Israel. We need both sides, and the split, the whole idea of left and right is sore. And then when I read Tanakh, it always gives me hope, because it's not new. The fact there are differences within Israel is not new, but they also give answers. So I'm going to I actually looked up, because this is like something very beautiful that people don't know. Like in Ezekiel, who was a prophet in Babylonia, and that will move into Babylonia with Ezekiel. He was a prophet taken with what many people don't know, that before the temple's destroyed, King Yechoniah was taken in with his mother and Judeans exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. Instead of destroying the temple, he took the king. And Yechezkel was one of these prophets, Ezekiel, and he prophesies, one of the first prophets in Babylonia. And he speaks and he says what God tells him to say. He says, God tells him, take 2 sticks. And on one right, this is the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim and of the tribes of Israel associated with him, and the other right, Yehuda. So you have Yosef and you have Yehuda. So Yosef always represents the northern tribes who were exiled in 722 by the Assyrian Empire, and we don't know exactly where they are. They got lost. And then you have Yehuda, the southern kingdom. And he says, put the sticks together. Put the sticks together and make them into one stick, and they shall be joined in my hand, in God's hand. And this whole image that Ezekiel's meant to take these 2 sticks as one stick and hold it in front of the people. I'm asking, where are our leaders now? Why don't they take 2 sticks and say, this is Tel Aviv, this is Jerusalem, and we are one people. So I feel like we're missing the leadership of the Tanakh, that they went through so much pain to write these words down. We have the pain in our books, and we've gone through enough pain. Let us learn from the pain, from Jewish pain that's been written for us, from ancient Jewish wisdom. I often wonder why we don't take our ancient Jewish wisdom more seriously, because, growing up, there's always respect for Eastern religions and wisdom and Indian wisdom in America, and I have all the respect in the world. But I've been born Jewish. And when I go into my Jewish wisdom in the Tanakh, I discover parts of myself and my history which I had no idea about. So when I chose the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, for example, I didn't realize how much it would resonate within me. I chose them because they were Babylonian prophets. They came from Babylonia to Judea. And my grandmother was from this village of Al-Uzair in the south of Iraq, where the scribe of Ezra is buried. And her father was the caretaker. And that's why I chose the book of Ezra. I'm like, he was the
Wonderful.
caretaker of Ezra's grave, and I didn't know anything about him. So opening these books and saying, wait, they returned. And I went to a Jewish school. I had a very good Jewish education. I studied Tanakh at university, but I never touched these books before. I never understood how the Jews returned then. And reading these books made me realize, first of all, you learn about Cyrus the Great. You learn that we work together within the global world. Without Cyrus, they couldn't have returned. They needed that Persian
Correct.
permission. They were a Persian vassal state. They paid taxes to Persia. And Ezra and Nehemiah, part of their job was to tell the people, calm down. This is what it is. We're grateful that we can rebuild the temple. We're going to rebuild ourselves as a people. We don't need ego here. We just need to reestablish our communities and serve God. That's our mission here. And they faced all different challenges. Inside, within, with Jews, obviously, and also outside from non-Jews. And they had a lot to deal with. And the way they dealt with it, I feel something we can learn from in Israel today. Again, the issue of leadership, strong leadership that is without ego, with humility, with a sense of Jewish history and purpose, like what you said, that being a Jew in Israel isn't just about our country, but we have this bigger mission that we're told in the Tanakh to be a light unto the nations. And the truth is, you see it on just this morning. I was at a Shiva call at my teacher, and her husband made a lovely coffee. And I said, wow, this coffee's delicious. Where's it from? So this is a little like yishuv, and there's a little coffee shop in front of the yishuv. He said, it's from the coffee shop on the yishuv. What they do is these two guys have this initiative in South America where they give the technology to these farmers, coffee bean farmers, small farmers. So they're supporting small farm industry. And in return for their help and technology, they get a certain percentage of beans back to Israel and they sell coffee here. I'm like, that is being
wonderful?
a light to the nations. And when my Iraqi friends say to me, we need to get rid of Iranian proxies. And I'm like, well, would you work with Israel? Because we know how to deal with terror. And we'd love to work with Israel and learn to get rid of terror. But that we can, there's so much we can teach from how to live in the desert and create water that's sustainable and create cohesive communities. One thing in the war is also seeing how communities have come together. That's, maybe war is what makes us one stick, one people, unfortunately. But like down the road, the community center, the shelter is where everyone comes together and you see the beauty of just the everyday person, where people come with their guitar and there's already a piano there and someone set up a library. It's a very Jewish shelter. It's got the coffee and the kumkum of hot water, and they put effort to make it as happy. Exactly, to make it a happy place, even when there's sirens and everyone comes together and you meet your neighbors.
That's absolutely wonderful. And so it gives me a lot of hope, because obviously, certainly as the war went on, I could see from obviously all of you in Israel, it was tiring. Days and weeks of interrupted sleep, etc., can still bring you down a little. But this sense that it's not new, and that we've gotten through it before and we'll get through it again, which I think we get from the Tanakh. And, just the point that we used to always speak about, and which you speak about in your course on Ezra and Nehemiah, is the idea of the dream meeting reality, right?
Yeah.
And if we just look at that in terms of, and just to give everyone context, so as we said, the Jews go into exile in Babylon and Yechezkel is one of those people, as you mentioned, in 586. And actually 52 years later, Persia defeats Babylon, and then Cyrus says you can go back, and that's in approximately 70 years as prophesied by Jeremiah. And so a certain number of Jews do return, and a little later, and begin to build the temple, but they are stopped by other people who are not happy that the Jews have returned to Israel. So again, something that we, of course, saw in the 20th century and are seeing all the time happened then too. Happily then, though, we had a little later where the Persian, I can't remember, it was Darius now, I apologize, but who is it, during the time of Ezra, and then again Nehemiah is
Yes, there's
further Persian kings.
Xerxes, yeah. And it's
Artaxerxes.
confusing because they don't name them specifically always. There's so
Right.
much tension and change of kings that it is confusing all the time.
And Hebrew names versus what presumably their Persian names was also,
Yeah.
we're not really sure. But approximately 20, 30 years after the first return, there is a second Aliyah under Ezra. And
he's the spiritual leader. That's the point. They built the temple in 520 BCE.
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah. Or 522. It takes them like 20 years to build. There's so much opposition. They don't want Jerusalem to be the center. The people who had been placed there by the Syrians policy of when they conquered a place was to take the original population and exile them to one place, and then they'd bring another population to replace that population. So it was like a swap of populations. And so the Kutim were put in Jerusalem and in Israel, and these people came to and made Samaria their main place. It's a very interesting story. If you do my course, we can go into it. It's a fabulous story. And the Samaritans were sabotaging them every step of the way. And their sabotage continued in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah. And you see, when you have a strong spiritual leader who's connected to the people, not just to God, it was all about the people and empowering the people and giving them the Torah back. Ezra reestablished what the Torah looks like, what Judaism looks like. We couldn't recognize Judaism before Ezra and before this exile, because we are a diaspora people. The whole idea of a synagogue is a diaspora. What happens when you're exiled and the temple of God is destroyed? You have to create new places of gathering. And the whole idea of a Beit Knesset is to have a minyan, to have 10 men together, to be a community, to stay together. That alone is just such an ingenious way of keeping Jews together. He created all these laws and ways of dealing with the Torah that decentered the temple, actually, because he said we need to empower the people. If we are exiled again, we need to make this much more than just about the temple, where corruption can happen with the priests. We need to empower the people to be close to God. And we do that through the Torah, through the book. And that's when we become people of the book, is with Ezra. And this is this is something that also, as a Middle Eastern Jew, as my family comes from Iraq, my father was born in Baghdad, I look at them and why they came to Israel in 1951. There was Jewish persecution in Iraq.
Yes, please tell us. Because that is where the two meet. The return in Ezra's time to the return, the beginning of the third state of Israel in 1948, and how we get to then the Aliyah from, indeed, ancient Babylon. Go for it.
So there was 135,000 Jews living in Iraq. We call ourselves Babylonian Jews. That's what we call ourselves. We're not Iraqi Jews, really. They don't understand. Iraq's a new concept. It's a new country created in the 1920s by the English. For them, they were Babylonian Jews, ancient people. They speak a Judeo-Arabic that's more ancient than the Arabic spoken by Iraqis today. It's the old Baghdadi Arabic that was preserved by this very cohesive, insular Jewish community that survived. I mean, just these facts alone are fascinating. Baghdad used to be a third Jewish. The Iraqis today still speak about the finance minister, Sarah Sassoon, who was the main finance minister for Iraq and preserved the money of Iraq by selling the oil to the British petrol company by the gold standard and not by the British pound. He is remembered as caring about Iraq. The Jews helped form the modern day Iraq. But then, and this is important to say after Yom HaShoah, is that Nazism entered the scene in the 1930s, and it entered in the form of anti-Zionism. Hebrew was forbidden. Any teachers from Palestine were sent back, Jewish teachers. They were called Palestinian teachers, by the way. There was this Fritz Grober, he was the ambassador from German. He translated Mein Kampf. They had the Berlin radio translate to Arabic and aired in Iraq. There were German teachers within the Arab schools. So there was this insidious anti-Jewish sentiment slowly coming into the system, which was foreign. Not to say that the Jews in Iraq were always safe. They were always the minority. They were always dhimmis. And the Ottoman Empire, there were many issues. And I'm happy to do a whole, talk on that and go point by point, because it's sore. It's a painful history being a Jew sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
And then in 1941, there was a coup in April by a pro-Nazi group, which included the Mufti of Jerusalem. And that led on the 1st of June, a massacre broke out, a mob massacre against the Jews. And something else important to say is that the British had just defeated the Iraqi army, this coup, this renegade army that had taken over, and the region who was friendly to the British had to flee. The region was coming back on this day on the 1st of June, and the British army were just across the river when this massacre broke out, and they did not do a thing to save the Jews. It was a 2-day massacre, and this taught the Jews of Iraq that there is such a thing as anti-Semitism, and it comes in the form of there is an Arab anti-Semitism, and it's not like German anti-Semitism, which is ordered, but it's a deep hatred. It looks like October 7th, as every Iraqi that I interview says when they speak about the Farhud, which happened on Shavuot on the 1st of June 1941, they say that it was exactly like October 7th.
It is so sad that we have something to reference, whereas when you and I spoke about this many years ago, in fact, we didn't have that to reference.
Right. When I first learned about the Farhud, it was painful to learn about.
Tragic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Jewish history is hard.
Yes. And then it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yes. 40 things.
So what happened then?
The Israel was established in 1948. Already things were bad before. And with anti-Zionism, the media had lots of things against Jews.
Yes.
And so slowly people are being poisoned against Jews. Jews were dismissed from civil jobs. There were quotas at the universities. It became not safe to be a Jew on the street. You didn't know if you were going to be picked up and arrested and accused of Zionism. There were so many young Jews who were thrown into prison. And after the Farhud, the Zionist movement was operative in Israel clandestinely, and they were giving guns in Iraq, in Baghdad, because they said if there's another Farhud, we have to defend ourselves. And young people were joining because they didn't want it to happen again. They wanted to defend themselves. And things were getting so bad after the establishment of the State of Israel that Jews began smuggling themselves out, thousands. And the prime minister saw this, and that meant they're losing money because they're leaving with all their valuables. So they make a deal with Israel. Israel's also very concerned about the safety of the Iraqi Jews. They don't want another Holocaust. The Jews in Arab countries, after the State of Israel was established, they were like pawns, and the Iraqis said it themselves. If you look at international conferences, that you have these Iraqi officials say, well, we have the Iraqi Jews. Like, if you have Israel, if you establish Israel, we have Jews, and they're in danger. You're endangering Jews. And that's why I believe a lot of the Iraqi Jewish leadership didn't support Zionism even. And the idea of modern Zionism in Iraq was very foreign. Like, my great-great-grandfather was the Chacham Bashi. I never know how many greats. He was the Chacham Bashi between 1917 and 1923. And he was known not to support Zionism. But why? Because of this threat for his community. And so
that wasn't an ideological point, whereas, say, in Europe, that was quite a different discussion.
Right.
This is in fact something to do with being able to live and to continue to live in what was modern day Iraq by that stage.
Exactly. Let's put it this way: they were silenced. They were not allowed to be Zionists, and the whole idea of Zionism was also very foreign to them. By the way, like, when I think about the way I grew up, I wasn't brought up with Ben Gurion or Herzl or never heard of them. And I was thinking about this, like, my family, my grandmother would never have known who Herzl Ben Gurion, like most Iraqis, like, who are these European Jews even. And obviously
Correct.
the people in the know-how and in the leadership knew who they were, knew about the Zionist organization and the whole movement. And there were even some of them part of it. I don't know how much some of them were. That's another discussion. But
Yes.
for the average Iraqi, Zionism was the Tanakh. Zionism was Ezra and Nehemiah. They knew Ezra and Nehemiah. Every Shavuot, that's Id as Ziyara. That's the festival of visiting, where they'd go to Ezekiel's grave in El Chifel, and they'd go to Ezra's grave in Al Uzair. They'd visit graves of prophets. They'd go to Daniel's grave in Kirkuk. There's Nahum's grave in Kurdistan, in the north of Iraq. That's the festival of pilgrimage for them. So they couldn't pilgrimage to the temple, so they pilgrimaged to their prophets' graves, to the Kvarim. And that was their
interesting
connection to Israel.
Those are all prophets of exile.
Yes.
Obviously, that's where those graves are going to be. So, wow. So they were doing this all the way until when was the movement then? When was that?
So they could
when
only
your grandmother
leave
came.
Right. So the Jews didn't have passports. Why were they smuggling themselves out? They didn't have passports just to leave. We just take it for granted. We live in a country, we get citizenship, we have passports. No, Jews did not have passports. So Israel made a deal with Iraq. They worked very hard to create, and they tried different things, by the way, but this worked. The law was passed giving Jews permission to leave with no return. They had to give up their citizenship. You get your passport, but it was a laissez-passer passport. It was the passport of no return. If you leave, you can only go to Israel and you cannot return. And then they froze their bank accounts, took away all their valuables. They could not take anything. Their properties was worth nothing. The Iraqis knew, why should we pay for this property? And still today in Baghdad, their houses are empty.
And what year was this?
In March 9th, it's called the Taskit law. It was passed, and it was a big shock for the Jews. Do we stay? Do we go? It wasn't so obvious. The sign up was slow at the beginning, and even the Zionists said to them, don't sign up. We don't even have planes to take you out. The whole thing was a bit of a mess in many ways. But then with the
balagan, we call it a balagan.
Yes. But there was real anti-Semitism. People say, no, it's just because of the state of Israel that no, every Iraqi you speak to will be able to tell you a story of anti-Semitism they experienced, or that someone in their family experienced. It was street anti-Semitism. It's like the truck came and like tried to run my father over because he was a Jew. Like that kind of anti-Semitism where they did not feel safe anymore. What was their future there? They did not know. And you have the push out because of anti-Semitism, but you also have the pull. You have the pull to Israel.
Right, that's where let's go to that. Yes.
Exactly. You have the pull that, what do we pray for every day? What are we saying in our in the Birkat HaMazon? What are we saying at the end of our Seders, like next year in Jerusalem? And here they are, and they're being given a ticket to Israel. So it's this training of 2,600 years. Of this yearning for Israel. This is who they are. So, okay, we love Iraq. We love Babylonia. We are Bavli Jews, but we're going to Israel, at least that. So, and it was a push and a pull, and they arrive in tent camps. And Iraqi Jews are amazing because they don't hold bitterness towards Iraq, and they don't hold too much bitterness towards the harsh conditions in Israel. They laugh about it. I sit with an Iraqi group every week, and they laughed one week when they were saying they had to pay for their tents. They had to take out loans, and only later did they pay for their tents. And they said, yes, we paid for our tents. Have you paid for your tents? My family paid for their tents.
Marvelous.
It was really funny, these little details. But they rebuilt their lives. They rebuilt because at the end of the day, they became part of the Jewish people.
I'm going to hold once. Go. Okay.
The operation that was designed by Israel was originally called Operation Alibaba, very like Middle Eastern romantic. What was it recalled? It was called Operation Ezra and Nehemiah. If you're going to get the Jews out of Iraq, get them out with the biblical name of Ezra and Nehemiah. And they came. And 120,000 left. Today there's 3 Jews in Iraq, they say. If that. And the point is, and all the Iraqis I speak to say, when I say, would you go back? They say, no, we're safe in Israel. For them, the safety of being in Israel with the Jews in a Jewish state was worth it. And they rebuilt their lives, even though it was very difficult. We could have a whole nother talk about the difficulties they faced in Israel. But we're not going to go there. We're going to face what they've built. And now I sit with Iraqis, and there's a real joy in their lives, with their families, with the generations they've built within Israel. And they are now living within the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in Judea, in Jerusalem. And there's a joy in that. And that's what it is to live in history, to be brought up with the Tanakh, with biblical presence in your life, as Babylonian Jews always had. Iraqi Jews were always traditional, very traditional, while also being within the normal world. For them, you couldn't separate it. There was no such thing as religious or secular. Really no such thing. Still today, like, what does it mean to be secular? You're Jewish, and as a Babylonian Jew, this is what we do. We know where we come from. And when you know where you're coming from, you know where you're going. And that's what gives the Iraqi Jew such a special strength.
Think specifically, if you know your books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which actually detail the people that came. And as you've already enumerated some of those struggles. But there was more than that. When Nehemiah arrives and sees how Jerusalem looks, which possibly was like a tent city, that you arrive and the place is in ruins and you've got to somehow rebuild your life. I think it's such a testament to then and to now to know it again. It was done before, we can do it again. And as you say, by knowing our Tanakh, knowing that history, the Iraqi Jews could pick up and have that resilience.
Well, it's the dream. The Tanakh gives us the dream and the vision. The reality is really difficult, and the Tanakh never shies away from the reality of it, but we still have the vision. We still have the vision of Ezekiel. We still have that vision of two sticks coming together and becoming one stick. When you have the words to give you the vision where to go, then you have a how to get there. And every tent camp that existed is now a successful city. Take Kfar Saba, Kfar Ono. Now in Mekochayim, it was a Mabara. It's now towering. Isn't that amazing? Means to be a Jew. It is amazing.
What a miracle. And as you say, testament to strength, to history becoming memory, becoming present.
And we're lucky we get to be part of it.
Absolutely. At one point in the middle, a couple of weeks ago, someone said to me, they're not sure how much they enjoy living through history. But I think if we keep our eye on the ball, keep our eye on the past that comes into the present, perhaps
we need to remember,
as you say, we have the hope.
Yeah, we need to remember. And I'm speaking as a mother of a son who's in Lebanon at the moment. Do you think I'm happy he's there? No one's happy their children are in Lebanon. Not one person. We do not want war. The cost of this country is steep. And I'm the first to say it's not easy. No one wants this war. No one enjoyed the sirens. We have suffered. And we're even sick of being told how resilient Israelis are and strong Israelis are. We don't want to be that way. We don't.
Exactly.
But we have no choice. And we know what we're choosing. We're choosing to protect ourselves. We're choosing to create a country that's free in spirit, to create just societies, hopefully, and societies that just have families, safe families that just enjoy each other and have simple Shabbat meals together. Just simple. We just want simple peace. And to share that with the region and the world.
Amen. And on that, wow, thank you, Sarah, for sharing all that. So much we've packed in. I just want to say then on that, we wish you in Israel, and for us as well, but a Yom Huledet for Yom HaAtzmaut, please God, next week, which by the time we come up with this may be tomorrow, I'm not sure, but a wonderful 78th birthday, because our current state of Israel, which should take us and remind us of the first and the second that we've had, but that we should have so much success and that we should build that society that Tanakh has told us to build. And I think you're doing a great job, just yourself, but even more than yourself, all the people around you. Thank you for your inspiration. And a l'chaim, and a Chag Sameach.
Amen. Chag Sameach. Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. And as we're saying to everyone who's listened, we hope you've enjoyed. If you have questions, if you have requests, if you'd like to hear more, let us know. And we'll put something together with Sarah, with our favorite Iraqi Jew, put something together, and just everyone should have a good and safe and wonderful Chag Atzmaut Sameach. Thank you.
Two Jews and a Scotch is an initiative of the Academy of Jewish Thought and Learning. Search Two Jews and a Scotch to find us on YouTube or Spotify, or visit www.adult-ed.academy for more.